Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Bad Writing. I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking about kind of an interesting concept, which is something that I recently kind of came into my consciousness through watching one of our panelists' latest videos. And this is the concept of cultural vandalism, in which people take stuff that has created a pop culture following that is part of the fabric of our society, and purposefully destroy it in an effort to change hearts and minds. And I thought it would be an interesting topic to talk about on bad writing, because typically bad writing is the culprit on this stuff. And so I want to introduce you to my distinguished panel for tonight. First of all, we have someone who is in charge of the hearts and minds of future filmmakers and storytellers, who is Professor Sean Collette. Professor Sean, why don't you tell people what you do and where you do it?
I'm a professor of film at the College of Southern Nevada in Las Vegas, and I teach editing, sound, visual effects, and in the summers I teach rock video production. So, but most of the time I spend trying to spark the imagination, get them away from the mainstream, and get them to use come up with their own concepts and stories, because everybody's got a story to tell, but a lot of people just don't recognize it yet. So I try to reinforce that desire to create something fresh and new, get rid of the Marvel stuff.
Right on. And the guy who inspired today's live stream with his latest excellent video on the current state of Star Trek, Mr. Reagan himself, Chris Coles. Chris, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself?
Well, I do a political YouTube channel, so you might hate me, but but I do. I came to LA to write, and I've been writing for many years. Written probably hundreds of short stories, and it's a critical part of our culture, and people don't really realize how impactful fiction is. Really, I remember I was a kid watching Indiana Jones, thinking, I want to believe the views of Indiana Jones. He's a fictional character written by other human beings, and I want to believe what he believes because I like him so much. And I thought, wow, that is really powerful. And so even at a young age, I realized the influence that film and television can have on the culture and on people's hearts and minds. And so I wanted to be a part of that, because I felt like, we have a responsibility to try to teach the next generation proper values. I don't think that's been happening, and I think that film and television has shifted in a direction that I don't really like all that much. But it is a powerful medium, and so it's a really big part of politics. Anyway, so I'm into it. Not all my viewers always are, so I like to come on the Salty Nerd and talk to you guys about this stuff sometimes, because my viewers, they just really like hard politics. It's annoying.
And speaking of politics, so just so everyone out there watching knows, we at the Salty Nerd podcast, we're kind of politically agnostic. We don't really talk about politics because we believe our channel is a place where people can come to escape that type of stuff, talk about movies and TV shows that they love or love to hate. But I felt like it's relevant here because there's a lot of politics that is kind of ruining entertainment because it's being injected into it. And so the purpose of this stream is really to talk about how getting political can ruin people's entertainment and enjoyment of entertainment. And the kind of purpose of this discussion is to talk about how we can get away from hyper politicized stuff and get back to the fun of science fiction or these franchises that we grew up loving. And before we get into this, though, I just want to shout out to the people who have joined us in the chat so far: Andre Anderson, Anthony Mark, Darth Maul, JT Gunter, Snail Messiah, Joey Mansquash, Anima Confusa. I know that Gimpy is out there watching us as well. Thank you all, guys, for being here. Novus Tullius, we appreciate you being in the chat. And as always, throw in those comments as we go along. We'll feature them if I feel like it's relevant. But the first thing I want to do, Chris, your latest video on your Mr. Reagan channel kind of covered Star Trek Discovery and the cameo from J.J. Abrams' sister, Stacey, who plays the president of Earth, the entire Earth. I like to joke that she actually lost the election. She goes around telling everyone that she's the president of Earth. But your video was I think it's the best video you've done in a while. Not to say that your videos are bad. It's just that this one really, I was intrigued by it in a way that I haven't been with some of the other topics that you touch on. And I think it's just because it's so kind of relevant to Star Trek nerds like myself and people who are passionate about Star Trek, because you hit on a lot of very interesting ideas and topics and stuff like that. And the thing that struck out the most to me was you basically said that the people in charge of Star Trek are creating cultural vandalism. They're basically intentionally ruining Star Trek for a wide variety of people by injecting their propaganda, their beliefs, and stuff like that. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on what exactly is this concept of cultural vandalism? How would you explain it to someone who maybe isn't familiar with what's going on?
Yeah, it's a tough topic because I do think it kind of all boils down to bad writing. I mean, at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of us who grew up with the original Star Wars movies, and we watched the prequels and we thought, why did you ruin Star Wars? But the truth is that George Lucas was not intentionally ruining Star Wars. He was just creating prequels that we didn't like, that we thought were not true to his original vision. And we all complained. Everybody of my generation complained about those prequels. With Star Trek, I think it's a lot different in the sense that I think that to some degree it's being done intentionally. There, and in the new Star Wars as well, in the new Star Wars movies, I think it's being done intentionally. There is a certain kind of attitude in Hollywood, I think, about fans of popular, you might call them classic 80s movies and TV shows from the 60s, older content that embraces what some people would call toxic masculinity or traditional values, stuff like that. And there's this idea that the fans are somehow bad people, or that the messages within those projects was bad. So we have to change it. We have to change the culture. We have to change these projects. And, at the end of the day, if you think that a project is presenting a bad message, I understand the impulse to want to change that project to some degree and make it something more ethical or whatever. But this idea that the fans who like it are also bad, and so we have to purge them somehow, and we have to bring in a bunch of new fans. So far, I don't think that that's worked very well, first of all. And secondly, it's a cruel thing to do, because you do have a lot of people whose lives are to some degree shaped by the fictional projects that they've read or watched or enjoyed as a kid. And they, when new products are come out around that theme or within that franchise, they get excited and they buy it and they eat it up. It's like another part of their existence, a part of their identity. Yeah, it's strange. People identify as Trekkies, people identify as Star Wars fans, and so when you start to try to shift it in a way specifically to annoy them or to put them off, or to say you're a bad person, to me that's a cruel thing to do. That's you wouldn't go into an Amazon jungle and go to a primitive tribe and say everything that you do is wrong. You need to eat McDonald's. We're going to put a McDonald's up here. We're going to give you Levi jeans. You're going to dress the way that we say you're going to dress, and you're going to eat the way that we say you're going to eat. No more of this running around naked and throwing spears at things. No, 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 no. You're going to do what we tell you to do. Nobody would do that because that would be considered racist. That would be considered culturally offensive. And yet they do it with like basically anybody who was a straight male growing up in the 80s. Oh, you're a bad person because you liked Star Wars. You're a bad person because you like Star Trek. So we're going to make everybody in Star Trek a lesbian or a person of color. And we're going to make sure that if we do put a straight white man on this project, they're going to be evil, they're going to be hateful, they're going to be a bigot, they're going to be the kind of person that we think you are, and we're going to try to invite this whole other host of fans. I don't think that's really worked for them. I had to watch Star Trek Discovery in order to make this video. Good Lord, you warned me, Matthew. You said, I feel sorry for you that you have to go through this. And indeed, it was, to some degree, it was a bit fun because it was so shocking. It really was shocking to watch such. I don't actually think it's as poorly written as some people do. A lot of people get mad that it's poorly written. But I don't think Star Trek necessarily has to be like the best written thing for it to be a bit of fun. Stuff like soap operas aren't well written, and they're a bit of fun. Like I think Game of Thrones is essentially like a soap opera written in medieval times. I still think it's a bit of fun. So I don't mind badly written scripts as much as I find the hateful rhetoric on that show and the themes and the ideas that are inherent, in that show. With the writers obviously hate a certain kind of person, and they've created a show to condemn that kind of person. And that kind of hate, I just don't think belongs in, something that is so popular like Star Trek. If you want to make a hateful show, make an original show. You don't have to make Star Trek. But, of course, the real reason that they chose Star Trek, I think, well, two reasons. One, financially. Of course, they're going to get a built-in audience to some degree. But then secondly, I think that deep down they really did want to destroy something that the people that they hated loved.
Well, what's funny, Chris, is like when you called me up because you were doing some research for this video, and I specifically told you, I was like, after season 2, Star Trek Discovery has no straight white male characters.
That's right.
You were like, wait, what?
Yeah.
How does that work? Because like if a show was truly inclusive, it would have representation of everyone, right? Mm-hmm. But they've specifically gotten rid of every possible straight white male in the show. And I think that's part of like the cultural vandalism you were talking about, where the vast majority, and I know Sean can attest to this because we go to the Star Trek convention every year, the vast majority of Star Trek fans are older white dudes, and so like to eliminate their representation completely from the show, if representation is truly important, where you need to see someone like you in a show in order to identify with it, like most left-leaning individuals kind of insist upon, then the fact that there are no straight white men in Discovery says a lot, right? So, Sean, what are your thoughts on a situation like Star Trek Discovery? I know that you probably haven't watched all the seasons because you are an old school Star Trek fan, and like many old school Star Trek fans, you're not happy with the direction that Alex Kurtzman and his cadre of writers and producers have taken things. So can you give like a brief overview of the current state of Star Trek and why you think it's as bad as it currently is?
It's dead, Jim. The thing about it is, I think that the term cultural vandalism is very appropriate because, if it were just being done by mistake and then it would be cultural incompetence. But vandalism is always done with the malicious intent. And there is malicious intent in the writing and the casting and the development of these shows. They're not coming at it from a genuine love of the franchise. And I hear the argument like, oh, well, Star Trek was always political and everything. Yeah, they touched on political issues, but they touched on it from an outsider's point of view. They gave us the broad perspective, and you always had different members of the crew with a different perspective or take on the particular issue. Whereas now, everybody has the same take, and it's usually all bundled up into one character, and you're basically a bad person if you don't believe that. You don't believe the way the crew does, and that's not asking the bigger question. That's telling people what they should think, and damn you if you don't. I think that as far as where the show has gone, I break it down to people like this. I watched the first episode of Discovery, and it stopped there. I went no further. I could not go any further with it. Now, I watched Picard, season 1, episode 1. Stopped there. It was done. Over. And then I asked you, Matt, what's the story with the season 2? And he's like, yeah, give it a try. It looks like they might be, I don't know, who knows. And then, so I watched it, and my comment was, it felt familiar.
The first 2 episodes were.
Felt familiar. And then I texted you on the night of or the night after the third. It was like that Friday night. And I said, so what'd you think about the finale of Picard last night? It's like, what do you mean finale? I said, well, it was a finale for me, brother. I was done. And I haven't picked up any more episodes from Picard because it's the same writers. Think about it. It's the same producers, same writers. The same intention is going to be done. And it's coming from malicious intent. They've admitted as much. They don't care about Star Trek as Star Trek. They care about the message, and that's where it's coming from. So there's no big questions being asked anymore, like who we are as a people. It's questions being like more along the lines of, well, who are you going to believe, them or us? It's and it kind of reminds me of
scolding.
Yes, exactly. It's like you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. It's like, dude, why don't we take a step back and kind of look at the big picture, the paradigm, what's really going on? Because we all know we're not really being told what's really going on out there. So I think there's a narrative to it. And it also affords them a lot of lazy writing. There's a lot of lazy writing.
And, so that brings me to the question of like, how much of this is basically Hollywood hiring activists because, of just the way that interpersonal relationships work, as opposed to Hollywood being fooled by people who pretend to have talent. I want to show you guys a clip that I have here from the Timcast IRL podcast. And one of the things I like about Tim Pool's show is like they talk a lot about the culture war stuff. And there was a clip from a recent episode that talked about Star Trek specifically, and it kind of touched on this topic. So this is a 3-minute clip. I want to play it for you guys, and then I want to come back and get your reaction on their take on this stuff. So bear with me for a second.
A larger
here.
problem, which is that conservatives only have politics, right? Politics is the only sphere of our culture in which conservatives have any stake or any ability to affect any change. Conservatives don't have a stake in, publishing or the arts or anywhere else. And so that's the bigger issue.
That is changing.
I'm working on it.
It is changing. And, that's interesting. And conservative counterculture in the arts, I think, is a movement that's about, that should be about aesthetics. It should be about interesting work. It shouldn't be ideological.
Yeah.
And the work that currently exists on the left side of the spectrum is entirely ideological. And it's ideological at this point by design. So what we need to do is work, to like have good content, which I think, you guys are both doing, that is not political and that has
and the left is
more
losing
bearing on culture.
their
Yeah.
arts. The left is producing more and more ideological garbage that people
It's
don't want
because
to watch.
it's shitty and nobody wants to watch it.
Exactly.
Well, there's two big things happening with liberal arts. I mean, a literal sense, not the college sense.
That
and
too,
it's,
though.
And it's that one, there's a severe lack of talent, probably due to the fact that meritocracy is out the window for these people. So when you are hiring people for like the sake of your points, you're going to get someone who's never done the job before, who has no talent doing it, but it doesn't matter because everyone should have an equal, it should be equity. So everyone should just do this job. It's very obvious when these people have this ideology where it's like, take the tools from the farmer and give it to the farmhands. Oh no, they don't know how to farm, and then everyone starves to death. That same principle applies to every other industry. But the other issue is just that when you've got a lack of talent, but also a desire to inject ideology, which doesn't work.
No,
in these
it
shows.
makes bad art. It makes very poor work. A great example is, the kind of garbage I watch. So
I thought you were about to say Freedom Tunes. I was like, why you gotta be that way? She's looking right at me. She's like, I have a really good example right in front of me.
Except for the
you-
Fauci episodes. Those are
I don't need to hear it.
if you look at the Star Trek stuff, it used to be good. And now I haven't watched a lot of the new Star Trek, but I do watch
it's awful.
Red Letter Media talking about it. And then I sort of like dip in a little bit.
Do you know what the news-
It's a disaster, and it's all ideological. And it's like there's this affirmative action hire on the new Picard. And she's terrible.
what do you mean?
Raffi is this one character.
But how is that? There's I don't know.
So
how's
she's
that-
very stupid. And it's sort of impossible to believe that she could have gotten into Starfleet.
Oh, I mean, that's just that's like a plot choice
Right.
about a character. So
But it's poorly done.
You could make
Very poorly done.
Sure. The bigger issue is Picard is one of the first, I believe, the first follow up to the '90s series, which ended with Deep Space Nine, and since then all they've been doing is prequels. Why? We are culturally stagnant.
So there are a couple of things in that clip that I wanted to touch on. The first of which being, so it's well known that politics is downstream from culture, right? Whoever controls the culture eventually steers the politicians to where they need to pander to. And, the left has been kind of in charge of the culture end of things in America for a very long time. One of the things that they said in this video is that, when conservatives or people who aren't to the extreme left, I should say, like anyone from the middle to the right of the political spectrum, when they get involved in creative endeavors, they try to just tell a good story, or they try to just make the best art possible. But when people in the far left of the spectrum get involved, they're like, it's not enough to make good art. We have to send a message. And so the message becomes more important than the art. And in that sense, because they're pushing the message, they're controlling the politics that follow the culture. So I wanted to ask you guys, starting with you, Mr. Reagan, what do you think of that? Is that the situation we're faced with now, where basically there is no meritocracy in culture? It's just people get put into a position based off the strength of their political beliefs, and because of them being able to push that message that they're put in place in Hollywood.
Oh, definitely. I mean, well, here's the thing. It's a sort of both are true. The world still has hierarchies. The world still has meritocracies. But there is a certain faction that's always kind of trying to fight that. I think that's always been true of Hollywood, though. You tend to hire who you want. You hire like your brother's kid or something like that. You know what I mean? Like in Hollywood, there's always been this nepotism. So you've always got people in Hollywood who aren't necessarily the best because they're chosen for a reason other than being good at what they do. Certainly, a lot of what they're doing now is trying to push the culture and trying to push their political views. However, I think the reason why it makes bad content isn't the same reason everybody else does. I don't think it's the same reason everybody else thinks it makes bad content. Injecting leftist ideology, politically left ideology, into films isn't intrinsically bad. I think with films, your characters should have a perspective, and I think that you should be trying to express ideas and messages that maybe people haven't heard before, philosophical ideas, spiritual ideas, stuff like this. I think that this resonates with people. The problem with the left is that they don't always perceive the world in the same way that the regular public sees it, right? So if you want to create a story in which you make it clear that whatever, I mean, some kind of because leftists a lot of times will push an idea like being fat is really healthy. Like being fat is healthy. This is an idea that they push on the left that is obviously not true. I mean, literally no one really believes this. I mean, maybe you have some delusional person out there who thinks being fat is healthy. But I mean, nobody really thinks that. So if you do a whole episode of Star Trek or something like that, where you're dealing with a bully who's telling somebody that they should be skinnier, and that person proves that they are like the strongest and the fastest and the best because, you know, being fat didn't slow them down, and in fact, in some ways made them better. People are just going to watch that and roll their eyes. Nobody's going to believe that. You have to create realities within fiction that are believable and that resonate with people. And that's just one little example, but they do this all the time with lots of different subjects. With romance, they do this with, you know, with romantic entanglements. They do this even with conversation. They did this in the 80s a lot, where there was sort of like movie logic. Right? There was this movie logic or movie dialogue, that stuff like you would never hear in real life. And as a kid, I actually used to think, this is true. When I was living in Oregon, as a kid, I used to think that the way people talked in movies and the logic people had in movies was like the way people talked in California or New York or something like that. I thought it was like a regional thing. I was like, wow, people in California are so much cooler than us. They have this other way of talking. Because I was a child, you know, I didn't have the life experience to know, oh, that's bad writing. Okay. You know, I had no idea. So I just thought that this is just a regional difference. Growing up, I realized, okay, that was movie logic. That was like movie rhetoric. That wasn't really the way people talk. It was kind of bad writing, really. And we've kind of shifted back into that, I think, today, because not for the same reason. I think in the 80s, everybody was trying to be cool, you know, and that's why you had movie dialogue and movie logic. Today, everybody wants to be cool, but in a different way. People want to be politically on the right side, on the right side, on the left side. People want to have a very specific political message that fits the narrative in Hollywood, so they look cool at all of their, you know, cocktail parties with their Hollywood friends. And so they inject all of this stuff into movies that it just doesn't make sense. People watch it, doesn't make sense. If you want to write fiction that resonates with people, has an impact, and people perceive as good, you have to make it make sense. You have to make it resonate with people. You have to have people look at it and go, oh yeah, that's true. And I would also like to say about the hierarchies, we now live in an era in which we no longer have regional hierarchies so much. You know, it used to be that if you were the best at a hobby or the best business in a given region, or you were the best athlete in a given area, then you were highly praised. I mean, with athletics, it still happens like this a little bit. But in every other area, if you're like good at chess, it doesn't really matter if you're the best chess player in your hometown, because now we have something called the internet. And you can immediately compete with everyone in the world. And so now you have what I call super hierarchies. And you're competing with everybody all the time, all over the world, in every possible way. And so although Hollywood is trying, I think, more than ever to eliminate hierarchies and to have this sort of equitable hiring, it's just going to make their content worse and worse and worse. And you're going to have competition from outside that's going to get better and better and better. And, you know, it's all going to collapse. You know, if you keep trying, if you're a company that insists on hiring people because they're black or lesbians or whatever, you are going to fail, you know, because you're not hiring the best, and the best will emerge eventually somewhere, and your company is just going to fail. That's how I feel about that.
So, Sean, you know, you're a film professor. I went to film school. I can remember back when I was going to film school, all my professors were very left-leaning. And the best film professors that I had were kind of apolitical. Like, they didn't talk about politics. They just talked about movies. Yeah. But I did have a few especially at the head of the faculty, that were very outspoken politically. And most film students that I went to school with, like, they were just kind of ignorant and didn't really care about politics. So they just kind of like went along with whatever political leanings that their teachers preferred. It's like, oh, okay, well, you know, I hear Steven Spielberg is a Democrat, so I might as well be a Democrat. Like, I was very much, you know, when I was in college, like, I was very politically ignorant. I didn't really know the difference between Democrats and Republicans. So I was just kind of like, hey, you know, I'm in the middle. I don't really care. And it wasn't until I actually got out in the real world and started, you know, starting up businesses of my own and stuff like that, that I kind of solidified my political opinions and the realities of stuff. But when I was in Hollywood, I found out that, you know, this idea of meritocracy, which is basically people get rewarded for their talents, doesn't exist in Hollywood. Like, maybe in the old days of the studio system, where you actually had to like pay your dues and work your way up, you had a system in place for that. But in modern day Hollywood, everyone who makes the creative decisions in terms of like where money is funneled is either a lawyer or some type of like business person, like investor, or nepotistic hire. You've got most people who are writers have never taken a writing class. They're just people who know how to put words on paper or a computer screen.
I've never taken a writing class. That's not true. I've taken one.
Well, or even gone to a writing seminar, for God's sakes. It's like most actors haven't really gone to acting classes. They just kind of show up to auditions. And it's one of those things where basically like there is no gatekeeping in Hollywood, in the sense that like anyone can go to Hollywood and try to be whatever they want, a producer, a director, like whatever. You don't have to go to film school in order to direct a movie, even though you probably should. So I wanted to ask you about this idea of creative bankruptcy, in the sense that a lot of the people who go to Hollywood and tend to get hired have no actual background in learning how to tell stories, learning the language of film, learning how to work the equipment. They are just really good at interpersonal networking and getting hired based off of their alliances or their interpersonal relationships or their nepotism or like whatever. So what do you think would be important for people to learn if they wanted to actually produce good stuff in Hollywood?
Well, it's pretty deep well. But okay, so the first part, I don't think it's really necessarily like a conscious effort. Like when they go and we need to hire writers for this show. Let's go to leftistideologues.com and hire them. It tends to be more of a camaraderie friendship. I met this person at a party and I think they're, and because people now tend, with the advent of social media, well, I'll give you an example. Does any one of the three of us know in their own personal sphere of influence 1,000 people face to face that you know personally? 1,000.
Yeah, but that's because of the job that I do.
Well,
Mr. Reagan's famous,
right?
I'm Mr. Effin' Reagan. No.
The idea is that, okay, so we don't know. I mean, very few people are going to personally know 1,000 people.
Yeah, probably not 1,000. I'm exaggerating for comedic effect.
No. The idea, though, is that when you put out some random thought that you have on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, and then suddenly you get 1, 2, 3,000 reinforcements, like thumbs up, and so you've got this massive hit of dopamine. And so you're not used to looking outside of your own sphere of influence. You're used to looking inward. And that is always being reflected back at you. So when they hire these people to do this, they're hiring them based on, I don't think it's a conscious decision. I think they're not trying to find people that specifically are going to make a statement. They're finding people in their sphere that believe the same way and think I can get this person a job writing, and they have no experience, but it's easy, just like go make a movie, and that's the problem. So there's that echo chamber personality because of dopamine.
Are you saying that people get overly confident because of what they're posting on social media? They
Yes,
get too big of an ego
because
their
ego is blown up, and it's kind of like the Dunning-Kruger effect. They really don't know what they know, and
there's no humility anymore in the world.
Right, there isn't. The closest you're going to get to any humility is "my bad," which is not an apology. That's the closest we'll ever get to it. Like, I was wrong, or I misinterpreted. I was not informed as much as I thought I was. You will get "my bad," that's a problem. But the other thing is that when you're developing shows with this type of mentality, this self-reinforcement based on some type of validation from a mob of people that you don't know but happen to catch whatever you said, it gives you this enormous ego that you're never going to hear an outside opinion. this is why I think the silencing of opposition is such a big thing, because it's not that they've never heard it before, but if they ever do hear an opposing opinion, the first thing they do is shut it down. Some of the
Because
ways
it's painful to hear somebody tell you you're wrong and it makes sense what they're saying. That's painful.
Well, yeah, because you'd have to admit that you were mistaken. And we have social filters on our social media platforms that make us perfect all the time. So to be caught in an imperfect moment, suddenly that illusion is broken and you're no longer the cool kid. Like you said, back in the 80s, everybody's trying to be cool. Well, it's difficult to maintain that when everything you do is seen by everybody all the time, right?
Well, what's interesting, Sean, is so when I was in Hollywood, I used to hang out with this group called the Friends of Abe. I don't know if Mr. Reagan is familiar with this.
I was in Friends of Abe.
Yes.
How did we miss each other?
I don't
think
know.
You were
like
there before me.
Yeah,
I think we talked about this before.
Yeah, I was there when it first started, and basically it was a kind of a organization that Gary Sinise, the actor, started. And it was basically for people who lived and worked in the entertainment industry who were kind of like right-leaning, and John Voight was a big presence in the Friends of Abe and stuff like that. And I went to a couple of the meetings where basically, they'd get together for lunch or like gather at a bar, like whatever. And it almost felt like a battered wives therapy session, because you had all these people there who were like Republicans or libertarians or what have you. And they would just talk about how they were deathly afraid of people discovering what they actually believed, because they would get fired or they would lose work or something like that. And so this idea that Hollywood is open-minded and welcoming and inclusive only applies to the people who believe exactly the same things that they do. And so like I think a lot of conservatives and even middle of the road people are scared to stand up in Hollywood for fear of losing their careers. And the most recent thing is this Disney thing that's going on, where basically Disney came out against the non-grooming bill in Florida, and you have a situation where all the kind of right-leaning employees at Disney finally got together and started, boycotting Disney, and made like a little public thing in front of like the Disney studios. And this is the first time we've seen any type of pushback like this. And I feel like there are a lot more people who are like against like the far left leanings, like that are holding these entertainment companies hostage. Because they're like kind of like a small cadre of like hard leftist, whereas people in the center and to the right might outnumber them, but they're just afraid that the people at the top who make all the hiring decisions are part of that far left group. So, Chris, what do you think that there's any chance that we could see a shift where people who maybe aren't of like, the leftist ideology can kind of come out and take back some control in Hollywood?
Yeah, I think Elon Musk should just buy Hollywood.
Yeah, that's what I said. I thought about that too. I was like, but yeah, I mean that'd be.
Did you guys see it was a Crowder thing? I hate Crowder because it was such a good idea. The change my mind thing. That's so something I would do, and he thought of it first. That bastard. But I mean, it's genius. I mean, it's genius. It's genius. Hey, Krigler. I know that guy.
He's talking about your cat butt.
Yes.
Yeah. Valeria says that if a cat shows you its ass, then that means that he likes you. He's comfortable with you because he's showing you his vulnerable side. And I told her a cat showing his ass means that he likes you, and she said, "Yeah." And I said, "I know a lot of girls like that, actually." But, sorry, old joke. These are actually from America's Got Talent. Valeria went to America's Got Talent the other day, and she was in the audience and picked up those and brought them home for me. I'm not fully vaccinated, so I couldn't go.
You couldn't go,
but yeah, sadly. Anyway, so Crowder did this video the other day where he challenged a reporter, a left-wing reporter, about just it was really just one single point about the prevalence, the prominence of transgender people in America. And this guy really overestimated the number of transgender people that there were. And Crowder was like, no, it's not. What are you talking about? It's not that, or not transgenders necessarily, but those with like, biological problems where it was like unclear whether they were a man or a woman.
Right.
Androgyny.
Kind of like that. Now, I don't remember exactly the word that they were using, but now I've actually heard, this is a point that he didn't make on the show, I've actually heard that even if you have a disorder where it's unclear, you have a little bit, maybe both biological aspects of a woman and a man, that you lean very heavily one way. Like in like 99% of cases, you lean heavily one way, and there's just like a little bit of a ambiguity there. And so you're essentially like a man with like a little bit of woman parts, or a woman with a little bit of male anatomy. But even in those cases, it's incredibly rare. And so he was trying to show that this is incredibly rare. And they had this little debate, and the guy's like trying to hide his phone from, because he's looked it up. Aston, come on, man. What are you doing? You're killing me here.
He's shown the audience his butt.
Come on. Yeah, he obviously
He
cares,
loves everyone.
likes you guys.
Loves
Yeah.
everybody.
I'm trying to push him off here. So, so this guy's trying to hide his phone and everything. It's very awkward. And, so of course, Crowder puts this video out with a little breakdown of how he kind of owns this guy. And he really did. I mean, it was kind of embarrassing for the guy. The guy's essentially like gone into hiding. He's like disappeared. Like nobody's heard from him in a while. And, to your point, like it is very humiliating now, like on social media to be embarrassed that way. And so people don't really want to engage, like especially leftists. Like they don't want to engage with conservatives. Yeah, hermaphrodite. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the right terms are. Androgyny.
Hermaphrodite's one who possesses both sex organs.
Yeah, I think that there are other terms that are more like scientifically accurate, or I don't know. I haven't researched that stuff enough to be honest, but it just like the phenomenon of losing an argument and then immediately going into hiding. Like, why don't you just come out and say, "Oh yeah, you know what? I messed up. I was stupid. I read the wrong article, or I had the wrong information. Sorry about that." To me, like having just that little bit of humility, everybody's going to say, "Okay, fair enough." You know what I mean? Like,
well, you know what, Chris? Though, like the minute that somebody who is so steeped in wrongthink admits that they're wrong, everything starts, like their entire world begins to unravel.
It starts to unravel. But I see this. It's not just leftists, though. I see right doing the same thing. I see them completely unwilling to admit the fault in their own particular ideologies too. And again, I don't think it's necessarily a conscious.
I feel like a supervillain, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Stroking your cat. Yeah.
Yes, it's like
excellent.
I don't think it's necessarily conscious at our level. Now, at the top, like the big executives and stuff like that, it very well could be. In fact, it's likely that it is. But like, okay, episodes 1, 2, and 3 of Star Wars. Okay, how many people wanted to go up and say, "Excuse me, Mr. Lucas, this Jar Jar character is not going to work. We can't do this." Nobody's going to risk that, and I think that's one of the and that's what you mentioned before too.
Yeah, I mean, at a certain point, you get to a level in Hollywood where nobody tells you your ideas suck because they're afraid to.
Exactly, and it's so everybody becomes like a sycophant with you, and it kind of shows in culture now. Everybody's afraid to be wrong, and the more powerful you are, the less tolerant you are of ideas that might challenge your belief system, and unfortunately they're running things. And one of the reasons I was such a big Star Trek fan all the time was because of the fact that it always presented these big questions, like questions that only science fiction could answer, and yet you'd have different members of the crew with a different perspective or take on it, and who's right and who's wrong, and it was never that. I think one of the most poignant and one of the most difficult questions that franchise ever asked was Tuvix. if you remember that.
Tuvix, yeah. Who could forget
That-
Tuvix?
I mean, you can't forget this character. And the thing is that this was
I don't understand. I don't know what Tuvix is.
so Tuvok and Neelix were joined in a transporter accident, created a completely different character.
Oh, what Star Trek was this?
That was Voyager.
That was Voyager.
Okay, I
And
never watched Voyager.
The question was, this actually became a character that you can see integrating well with the crew further on down the line and everything. And the question was, once this character had declared that they want to go on living, like, I don't want to be separated into my two component characters anymore. Now you've got a problem. Now it's no longer an accident. It's like some type of act of nature. And it really asked a question, and it was probably one of the most difficult things that Janeway ever had to command people to do. Was she had to actually take a being and destroy it for the sake of two others. And you could see Kate Mulgrew's acting in this was really profound. She made a decision, and she wants Tuvok and Neelix back. That was the way, but wow. So those were big questions. Today, if you had the same question come up, it would be all like, we're going to tell you what to think. But it made you ask questions.
The last thing I wanted to kind of cover with that Tim Pool clip was at the very end, where basically Tim Pool said that, the people who are kind of in charge of Hollywood right now are creatively bankrupt in the sense that they don't know how to artfully tell, political stories. Like, it's always like, our way is correct, your way is wrong, follow our way, or they rely on prequels and they keep going back to this well where they're going backwards because, more talented people have created worlds for them to play instead of going forward, which actually requires thought and creativity and being able to sit down and plan stuff out. And so
also, they want to revise history. It's the 1984 thing.
Yes, it is definitely.
There are some problematic world-building elements. They got to go back and fix those.
Well, the question becomes: it's like, at what point is it malicious versus just like untalented? Where you have people who are like, oh, well, it's easier to go back in time in the Star Wars galaxy because we have all this lore that we can pull from, as opposed to actually going forward and creating something new that might possibly be unpopular or require a great deal of time and effort to figure out. Same thing with Star Trek. Like this latest thing, Strange New Worlds. Again, back in time. It's like, let's go back into the pre-original series timeline and stuff like that. They just keep going backwards. And audiences like that, that's a great way to stagnate a franchise, is to just keep going backward because there's no tension there. We already know what's going to happen. In fact, you create more problems going backwards because you mess with continuity. So the idea that, like, why don't they just keep going forward with the franchise comes up. Why do you guys think that we keep going backwards with these beloved franchises?
Well, like I presented you my argument, which is that I think that they want to fix the problematic elements in the world from an earlier era. I don't see, you and I have discussed this before. I don't actually think prequels are going back to an earlier time than in the original series, the original films, is actually a bad thing. I think that's kind of a fun thing. I think it's a fun thing to do. And like I always say, if you're a good writer, you can kind of get away with anything. You can explore different time periods. You can explore different characters. You can go do all kinds of fun stuff. The bigger problem that I have is that they are choosing to go after they're going after franchises that are beloved instead of making original material. And I will say that, whether or not, hey buddy, whether or not they're doing it because they're intentionally trying to destroy something that is beloved by the people that they hate. Oh, straight white men love Star Trek? Let's destroy Star Trek. Or they're just doing it because they are bad writers and they just, they feel like if they do they create some original content, they're not going to be able to find an audience, and so they're just like, well, I want to do a sci-fi. Let's set it in the Star Trek world so that we can put Star Trek on it, and then we can make more money, right?
Well, there's also this concept that the studio execs have about expanding a franchise's audience, and so they're like, well, we've got all the straight white males as the core audience already. Let's expand that to include people of color. Let's expand that to include more women. And so, how do we do that? We put women of color in the show and base it around them and stuff like that.
But that just goes to incompetence, right? So now we're just because there's ways to do that will work. But
absolutely it would. I mean, Janeway was a big hit. And
Janeway was a big hit.
Cisco. I mean,
Cisco,
these people. It's not. One of the things about it is a lot of it's incompetence, and a lot of it is malicious intent.
But I would argue that, so like if you have a genre, right, like science fiction tends to skew male, right?
Yes.
Females prefer comedies, they prefer romances. I mean, this isn't sexist to say, this is like backed by statistics, right? So the idea that like you're going to bring in more of like more African American viewers or more female viewers by putting a black woman as your main character doesn't make any sense, because like if they were fans of the genre to begin with, they'd already be there, right? So the idea that you have these intersectional check boxes, and Netflix is probably the biggest culprit of this, where like, do you have a gay person? Do you have a non-binary person? Do you have like blah blah blah? Like they have these check boxes of intersectionality that must be present in every show that they produce. It kind of goes counterintuitive, because you're just like, why not cater to the audience you have, as opposed to trying to bring in new audiences who historically don't watch this stuff.
Guys, I got a great idea. Based on what Matthew Kadish has just said, I think that we should collaborate on a project for Netflix in which we tick every box, and then there's just like one white male who's like the dopey loser, right? And then at the end of season 1, we kill off everybody Game of Thrones style and replace them with straight white men. Boom! In your face, Netflix!
I really think that there's the paradigm is kind of there's a lot of cultural stuff going back and forth. There's a lot of cultural bickering, and a lot of that is fed by the media. This is not organic. This is being fueled and stoked by media outlets, because bad news sells. Things like this. So like what they've done with Star Trek is they've made it dystopian, they've made it not fun, and they've made it into a genre where the best is not forward ahead of us. The best is behind us.
But they also cater to an audience that isn't there. Like, the whole
exactly.
go woke, get broke, or get woke, go broke type thing, where you have these people who celebrate the decisions to get more political
and push
in these shows,
well.
but they don't watch the shows. They don't buy the merchandise. So what they're doing is they're alienating the core audience for the accolades of people who don't watch the program.
No, they're trying to change the audience that exists into what they want, and that's what they're really trying to do. They're trying to say, if we present our proposition in this manner with their genre that they like, then they must love it because they love Star Trek. So why would they not like glom onto our and that's. But again, you're not talking about people that are making it or in charge of it that are fans of Star Trek.
I think that you've got this combination of people who think like the way you do. Let's add more. Let's add this other audience on top of the audience we already have. But then you have other people that are being hired to work with them that like hate a particular group, and that group happens to be the core audience. And so you've got this almost a conflict of interest, right? Where you have one person's interest is growing the audience, expanding it, and the other person's interest is excluding a certain group, which happens to be the core audience originally. And this person's actually destroying. This person hired the wrong guy, right? They hired the wrong people. They hired bigots essentially, and now you're excluding people. Look. Whether it's incompetence or it's malicious intent, I feel like this problem is not going to go away. And the reason it's not going to go away is because, it could be solved tomorrow with something called original ideas, right? Right. All you got to do is, you can create all the hateful content you want. I don't care. Be a bigot. Hate straight white males. I don't care. Just do it with original content so you're not destroying something that I like already. But the problem is you're never going to stop seeing this because of the fear of producers. They have this fear of original content because, look, if you make a project that's good, it's going to do well, whether it's original content or it's a franchise. But if you do a project that's bad, it's not going to do well if it's an original project because everybody's just going to go, this is lame. Nobody go watch it. Nobody's going to go watch it. But if it's like something like Star Trek, it's still going to get some kind of an audience because even if it's bad, there's a certain audience that's going to go, okay, we'll check it out. And then like even people like us will watch, like I watch Picard. I kind of watch Picard, right? So like you'll get people who love the franchise and will hate watch episodes because they're just like, I can't believe what they're doing. I would write this so much better, and
See, I can't. I can't.
No. I agree. I'm the same way with Discovery, but with Picard, I actually like to hate watch.
No, I can't. I can't even hate watch it. I can't even enjoy the hatred.
But Matthew knows what I'm talking about. He hate watches stuff.
He's forced to. He's forced to. He has to. It's his job.
For the show, yeah.
Fair enough. That's true. Yeah.
I wanted to tell you guys. So back when I was working at Paramount, this was around the time of Enterprise.
Jump the shark. Hey, you know what they did with the J.J. Abrams' sister Stacy in the final episode of STD this season? They didn't actually jump the shark. They didn't actually jump the shark. You know what they did? They jumped the whale. Boom. That's a fat joke. It's a fat joke. I'm here all night, ladies and gentlemen.
So back when I was working at Paramount around the time of Enterprise, there were, like one of the things that all the Star Trek fans who worked as pages at Paramount, which is what I was doing at the time, one of our secret dreams was to pitch a Star Trek episode to Brandon Braga and get hired in the Star Trek writing room and work on the show that we loved. And we quickly found out that the Star Trek TV shows never hired people who were actually fans of Star Trek. And the reason that they did that was because the Star Trek fans would basically hold their feet to continuity and stifle their creativity by telling them, oh, well, this happened in the original series, so you can't do this. And Brandon Braga didn't want to have those discussions. And so he specifically hired people who knew nothing about Star Trek to write for his like Voyager and Enterprise and stuff like that.
That's weird because usually you do have an expert if you're writing, say, like a medieval.
Well, Brandon Braga was the expert. He was the guy who was the heir apparent to Rick Berman.
I see.
And so like he didn't want anyone there questioning him. And I mean, this is what I heard. Like I don't know, maybe if we sat down with Brandon Braga, he'd tell us something different. But this was what I heard. Everyone told me, is like, don't let anyone on Star Trek know you're a Star Trek fan. Otherwise, you will be exiled and you will never have a chance to work on that show.
It's fascinating.
Yeah,
that is weird. I mean, that's because there used to be, like the Star Trek Bible, the things that you could do and couldn't do and things like that. And I think that they were going along brilliantly with Enterprise. When it's, I fell in love with that show. I absolutely love that show. But I think that to go out of your way to hire people that aren't fans, I think that's dangerous, but somehow it worked. I mean, I didn't have, because Voyager was one of my favorite, series. I really enjoyed it. It was, I think that in the situation they wrote it. A lot of people have a problem with some of the things that they did on Voyager, and I agree to it to some extent, but really there were some questions asked on there. There were some situations that they were put in that really put the values of the Federation to the test, and you could see both sides of it. It was, and that was one of the things, like in Captain America Civil War, it drew the loyalties of the fan base in two different directions. And that's very smart writing, because suddenly you do start challenging, your beliefs. And I think that's what entertainment should be.
It's like I was saying, you can get away with a lot if you just write well.
I do want to bring up this comment by Darth Maul. It says, Chris Pine was quoted in a recent article that Paramount needs to cater to its audience, and then everyone else can come along if they want. What are your thoughts? So I don't know if you guys saw this or not, but Chris Pine, who plays Kirk in the movie version of Star Trek, he basically said that Paramount was so obsessed with hitting that $1 billion mark that they kind of neglected the core fan base of Star Trek. And he basically said, hey, if you just make Star Trek for the Star Trek fans and don't worry about making $1 billion, guess what? You're going to be making more money.
You're going to be making
to hit that $1 billion mark. I think that's something that's very telling where, Chris Pine gets it. Why can't the Paramount studio executives get it?
Well, if you're an actor, if you're the lead actor on a show or a film, and Chris Pine did an okay job. I'm going to say, like, I was a little skeptical of Chris Pine because he's definitely not got that Shatner charm.
Well, who does?
But I like him. I like Chris Pine. I don't, it's like, he's definitely, he's not Shatner, but he does his own thing, and it works okay. And I don't dislike Chris Pine, I will say. But I think that if you're an actor and your project does not do as well as it's expected to do, there is going to be introspection, right? You're going to sit there and go, what did I do wrong? What happened with this project, right? And you're going to try to work it out. And oftentimes I think what you're going to do is, especially if it's your own fault, you're going to deflect, right? You're going to say, oh, it's this guy's fault, it's that guy's fault, it's the other guy's fault. In the case of Chris Pine, I don't think it was his fault. So I do think that when he's working out why the projects didn't do as well as, maybe
I mean he's just the actor. The actor
well,
shows
but
up,
an actor can ruin a project, let's be honest.
This is true.
I don't think in this case Chris Pine did. So I think he's right to sit there and think, okay, why didn't these movies do as well? And I think that he's kind of hit onto it, because in that article, his full quote, he's talking about how small the Star Trek audience is. He's like, look, the actual core audience of Star Trek is actually a relatively small audience. And that's why they didn't want to cater to that audience, because they didn't want to limit themselves. But the truth is, it doesn't matter how small the audience is. Like look at Harry Potter. Harry Potter really is for children who like fantasy stuff. How big is that audience? It's a relatively small audience. But Harry Potter is such a well-produced film and such a good story and such like popular books that it hit this massive audience, right? Kids who normally wouldn't have read stories about like a little British boy who, like, my wife's looking at me because she likes Harry Potter. And she's Russian. It's a Russian girl who grew up on Harry Potter, she's a lot younger than me, loved reading those books, loved watching those films, and that would not have probably been the target audience for that kind of genre before Harry Potter. But Harry Potter blew it up, and that's what you do. You go ahead and find your niche audience and just do a project that's so effing good that it gets a bigger audience. You don't just go for the big audience.
One of the big reasons why the original series movies did so well is because the budgets were always constrained to about $30 million per movie. And they would bring in close to $100 million, so like that was a big profit margin. Paramount could always
that was another point that Chris Pine was making,
Yeah, and with the JJ Star Trek, all of a sudden the budgets are now $100 million, $120 million, and they're trying to hit that $1 billion mark. It's like, if you made $250 million on a $30-40 million science fiction, budget, you'd be doing pretty well. But one of the things I want to talk about next is the actual writing aspect of cultural vandalism, in the sense that nobody knows, at least I should say, nobody in Star Trek or Star Wars knows how to properly write stuff if they're going to be covering like a political topic. And Red Letter Media put out an excellent video reviewing Picard episodes 4 and 5 recently. And I pulled a clip from it. I want to play for you guys. It's about 2 minutes long. And it's Mike Stalaka basically breaking down the problem with, the current writing on Picard, which is basically they don't know how to write for a message. And so I'm going to play this clip for you guys, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it.
The question is, why make commentary on that unless there's a point to it, other than to point it out and say, we don't like that. Clearly, whoever wrote that episode hates ICE. I get that. What does it have to do with the show? I get if you want to make a commentary on something, right? I was thinking about this while I was watching this, before the sudden gear shift to episode 5, right? I was thinking about the U.S.-Mexico border situation, right?
Yeah.
the whole concept of building a wall, the politics of it all. Should you arrest people, deport them? Should you let people in? It's a very political issue, right? And I'm thinking about Star Trek Voyager. Captain Janeway is flying in a spacecraft called the Star Trek Voyager, right?
Yeah.
And they encounter a planetary system. Now, you can help me write this, right?
Okay.
Let's say there are two planets. One planet has a lot of poverty and crime on it, and there's drugs and governments that aren't completely working for the people, and maybe the other planet.
They have all these beautiful resources. They got pristine, clear water.
That's the other planet.
That's the other planet. The other planet,
maybe,
yes.
Maybe it gets more sunlight, and the other planet is shrouded in darkness.
Make it a little bit science fiction-y. Like the other planet, the poor planet is like closer to the sun, and the sun's like,
okay.
It's going through some kind of weird phase where it's emitting this weird radiation that's really like playing havoc, and it's making the poor world unlivable.
Yes.
And all those people are trying to get into the nice world, so they don't die.
They want to get into the nice world, and so they cobble together. They used to have space travel. They cobble together spaceships and they fly over, trying to get to the other planet. But the other planet has like a force field around it, and they also have spaceships and they intercept. Right?
They have a culture that's very just like hands off, like stay away. We'll keep to ourselves.
Yes, we'll let some of you in, but not everybody from the whole planet, right? Mm-hmm. In an actual science fiction episode, you would have the pros and cons. You'd have Captain Janeway getting involved and go, how do we solve this problem, right? That's what politics is. That's why it's an issue, is because there are two sides, right? There's two ways to look at an issue. And that's how you do a science fiction show about a science fiction version of this situation that exists today.
So what Mike said at the end there hit me as very poignant, which is basically whenever something's political, there are two sides, right? At least two sides. And when you very clearly say one side is correct and the other side is wrong, what you're doing is you're creating propaganda as opposed to actually writing a science fiction story. Mm-hmm. Because a proper science fiction story presents both arguments, and even better science fiction stories leave it up to the consumer, the audience, to figure out which side they fall on. And this is an art that seems completely lost on modern writers, producers, and showrunners, especially of these beloved franchises. And it goes towards this idea of cultural vandalism, where basically they're turning these things into propaganda as opposed to good science fiction stories. And I've never seen, Mike on Red Letter Media, he's like a hardcore Star Trek fan. And in all their previous reviews, he's kind of like above it all, where he's just kind of like, okay, I know that it's crap, and so I'm just gonna whatever. This is the first time I've actually seen him talk about Star Trek where he seemed angry. He seemed like he was insulted by what he had just watched. And he breaks down perfectly why he was insulted. And it's because the writing is so clearly political. And I even think that he probably agrees with the politics that's being presented to him. But he's smart enough to know that Star Trek is not the place for this. He just wants a good Star Trek story.
Well, I disagree with that a little bit. Can I throw in on this?
Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like science fiction. Look, I'll say this right off the bat. I watched Picard. I know the episodes he's talking about. To some degree, and okay, hate me if you want, I watched Star Trek: The Next Generation as a kid. I was a fan, and they are destroying the character of Jean-Luc Picard for sure. But I do watch that show kind of as comedy at this point. I watch it as comedy. I really do. When they did the ice stuff, I was generally laughing my butt off. I was laughing because it was so hackneyed. It was so poorly written. I mean, it was just so stupid. Ice bad, immigrants good. It was just so dumb. And but look, okay, so this is what I think of science fiction. I'm a big science fiction fan, always have been. Love the Twilight Zone. I would say Twilight Zone actually informed the way that I write more than any other kind of writing. Maybe adventure stories like The Hobbit and Chronicles of Narnia when I was very young. But Twilight Zone really, in my adolescence, fixed the way that I write. And let me just say that fantasy has always... I think that there's a place for these people are the bad guys. These people are like the personification of the devil or whatever. And these people are the good side. Like, look, Star Wars is like this, right? And there's a place for that in fiction. It's called fantasy writing, right? Fantasy is all about slaying the dragon, right? It's all about this sort of like look at The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. It's all about there's this sort of dark force, these bad guys that there's no real logical, like, there's no logic to it. You're not like debating politics in a fantasy story. You're just going out and slaying the dragon. Fair enough. That's a great kind of story. It's great for children, good and evil. But once you get into science fiction, you get into a much more interesting, diaspora of thought, because you can talk about political issues. It's like Mike was saying. You can talk about political issues, and you can really get into the nitty-gritty and debate them, and there's so much beautiful room for exploration. Writing...
Do you know why there's a difference? Do you know why there's a difference?
Why is that? Why
science fiction on this topic? Do you know why?
Move the microphone closer to you. I think you're...
Uh-oh.
You sound kind of echoey.
Did we...
Anyway, give us the why.
So while Sean gets his technical issues taken care of,
I just wanted to say ethical dilemmas are what science fiction is about. I think. I don't know, Matt.
Chris,
you may disagree.
Chris, the issue I think that was going on here was
I'm back.
that. Hey, Sean. Real quick, let me just make this point though.
Yeah.
I think one of the big issues that Mike had in this is that so they spent 2 episodes. They spent 2 episodes going on. I'm going to mute you for a second, Sean. So they spent 2 episodes talking about the ICE and immigration stuff and having these characters running around. And then at episode 5, they basically just went completely on a different story path. And so Mike's big thing was like, what was the point of those previous 2 episodes? Right? They had nothing to do with the overall.
It was just to say ICE is bad. Yeah, immigrants. ICE is bad.
It was to inject a political message that had that in no way ties in to the overall story. I think that was the big reason that Mike was upset, was because he just wasted 2 hours being preached to for no good reason. And in your video, you kind of focus on the Star Trek Discovery episode where we have J.J. Abrams' sister Stacy show up as president of the United Earth. And it comes off as basically a flat out endorsement of her as like a politician, where it's like, hey, in the future, she runs the entire Earth. Why not elect her to be the governor of Georgia or what have you?
Right.
So it's very obvious that these programs are being used to push agendas now, as opposed to telling thoughtful, thought-provoking science fiction stories. Right.
So, but he does make the point that if you're going to inject a touchy political issue, do it with nuance. Really do cover both sides and go through it. And look, Mike is making a perfect point. You can talk about current political issues, but just address them as if it is an ethical dilemma, right? Because that's what politics are, really, right? Do you let 1,000 Americans die? Based on a threat. Like, let's say there's a threat where 1,000 Americans are going to die, or your wife is going to die, and you're a politician, right? As a good politician, as a good president or whatever, you got to let your wife die. You have to do that. But many people will not do that because they have an emotional connection, obviously. And that's what like an ethical dilemma is that you have to like deal with. It's like you gave the example of that Voyager episode where those 2 characters were merged, and then Janeway had to kill one to separate them and to bring back the other 2. That's a perfect example of a great ethical dilemma that science fiction can tackle and write well, and creates an interesting way to explore ideas that we wouldn't have to deal with in real life usually. Most people wouldn't have to deal with in real life usually. And that's why we love science fiction. It explores ideas that are fascinating. It's sort of like physics, right? It's sort of like Einstein developing the theory of relativity. You're imagining scenarios that most people don't think about most of the time, and exploring those and thinking about how they would work, and going through the logic and the reason. And that's really what the beauty of science fiction is. And they're turning science fiction into a fantasy with the veneer of science fiction, and then injecting their political perspective into this good guy, bad guy scenario, which is just going to like annoy everybody. And then even people who agree with them, I don't think are going to really like it all that much. I mean, maybe if you write it well enough, maybe they would, but I don't think that that's happening.
Real quick, for a $5 super chat says, "Hi, gents. A certain political activist cast as the president of Earth, but neglected to show other political views. It showed a lack of integrity." Of course, he's referring
Not just
to
a lack of integrity, a lack of intelligence. You should put in the other political views.
Well,
Sympathetically as well.
The point I was going to make before my internet connection was lost on my PC was because I missed everything that
Sorry,
followed.
we were just biding time until you got back. Really,
no. The reason it's different is because science fiction typically, not always, but typically comes from an outsider's perspective, whereas Lord of the Rings, everybody had a stake in it that we were behind. So it was good versus evil. Middle Earth is going to be destroyed. And the people that we were rooting for, they had a genuine stake in it. Whereas Star Trek, let this be your last battlefield. Okay. Great episode on race. Okay. Well, he's white on the right side and I'm black on the left side. He's obviously inferior. And they presented it from the outsider's perspective, like, you guys are crazy. There's no, what difference does it make? Whereas the ones who had the stake in it, those were they genuinely had their beliefs, and this was the benefit of going to Strange New Worlds and presenting problems that we may be facing in our everyday lives from an outsider's perspective. Today, it's all inside. We have a vested interest in this particular side of the political paradigm, so we're going to enforce that, and that's the difference. They don't know how to write from an outsider's perspective, and one of the big problems is because they don't see any other perspective other than their own. So how could they possibly write about it?
Well, what's interesting is that good storytelling is probably the biggest influencer that you can have in terms of propaganda. Like, for instance, when I watched The West Wing, I didn't agree with the politics of The West Wing, but it was so well written that I still enjoyed the show and I still tuned into it, even though I didn't.
Brilliantly cast too. Yeah.
I didn't agree with the politics of that show, but I was still entertained by it, and so I watched it. And I think like something like Star Trek, like even if it was like left-leaning, where it was pushing like a left-leaning political message, but it was told well, I'd probably still enjoy
Absolutely.
it. Like if you look at something like the Orville, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
So the Orville is basically like classic Star Trek in the sense that it does what Mike pointed out, which is if it's a political issue, they show both sides, and oftentimes they leave it up to the audience to decide what's right and what's wrong. And that drew a lot of people into the Orville. And you contrast that with current Star Trek, where it's just very blatantly they're endorsing J.J. Abrams' sister Stacy. They're endorsing, the immigration issue and stuff like that. In fact, the first season of Discovery, the writers flat out came out and said the Klingons are like Trump supporters. You know? So like,
and actually, the actor who played the villain said that he was intentionally trying to play Trump as the villain.
Yeah, and so like they have a very distinct political stance that they're taking, but they're so inept at telling stories that it comes off as ham-fisted and it insults the audience. One of the first rules of marketing and sales is like, people love to buy, but they hate to be sold to, right? So like if somebody knows that they're being manipulated or influenced or something like that, they're instantly going to, reject you. And so the key to being a good marketer or being a good salesman is to get people to want to buy as opposed to selling to them. And it seems like all like the major franchises that Hollywood is pushing out nowadays are all about selling you something as opposed to making you want to buy them.
It reminds me of Jim Ignatowski on Taxi trying to sell vacuum cleaners, right? He comes in, he's like,
I don't think I've seen that episode.
Oh, he comes in, knocks on the door. He's like, hello, Mrs. What is your name? I want to show, and he starts throwing all this shit all over a carpet and rubbing it in. And, oh, don't worry about it. It'll be fun. Like, this is amazing. And then, so he opens
This is
up.
Christopher Lloyd, by the way. Christopher Lloyd. Great impression, by the way.
He opens up the case, and there's an encyclopedia. He's like, where do I plug this in? And she's like, that's an encyclopedia. He's like, oh, I didn't get the vacuum cleaner job.
That's hilarious. That is brilliant.
I just remind, because he's trying to sell her on something.
Yeah, as opposed
really,
to
really, and it was a white carpet too, which was beautiful. So
that's
and I think Matt's right. It's about the idea of you're being told something that is a proposition that this is the opinion you should have on it, rather than here's the issue. Let's look at it from two different sides. And I think the democracy of technology has also made it easier for this to happen, because it really doesn't take a lot of, fundamentally it takes some technical skills to actually make a film, but everything is so much easier to produce now. So it really doesn't take, they only need a few minimal talents in the technical area, and it allows the so-called creatives to just take over everything, because now there's nothing that you can't do, and that's a problem. There's nothing that you can envision in your head that can't be produced on screen now, and I think that's one of the problems too. Is we've democratized the technology of storytelling to the point where anybody with an idea that wants to push it can make a story that is at the level of professionalism that gives it validity simply because of the way it looks.
So guys,
sorry, go on.
Let me ask you this. So, in the 60s and 70s, there was this counterculture movement against the studio systems of like the 40s and 50s and stuff like that, where we had young and inspired filmmakers like Francis Ford Coppola and Steven Spielberg and George Lucas and all these guys, the new kids who kind of came in and shook up the industry and brought it in a whole different direction. Do you think that there's room for like a conservative counterculture revolution where you have people who are more concerned with stories, like good solid stories, as opposed to political messaging to kind of come up and take the power back, whether it be with original properties or somehow getting control of like Elon Musking these franchises where you kind of come in, take them over and fix them? Is there any path back from where we currently are, from like propaganda into just good solid storytelling?
Oh yeah, me.
Just hire Chris. Is that it?
A serious answer though is that is a serious answer, but a more serious answer is I think that Jon Favreau in particular is really embarrassing the woke Hollywood folks. I don't know how much they know about Jon Favreau's politics. I don't know how much Jon Favreau has talked about that, or I don't even really know what his. My theory is that he's a libertarian, but he doesn't really talk about that. But the point isn't that he puts libertarian values in his projects or conservative values in his projects. The point is that he doesn't put political values into his projects. Right. He makes Star Wars content that is just good storytelling, stays true to the original sort of spirit of the original trilogy, I believe. And his show, The Mandalorian, Boba Fett aside, let's not talk about that. But his show, The Mandalorian, is so unbelievably successful, so unbelievably beloved. I mean, you can look up Luke Skywalker Mandalorian reaction videos on YouTube. Yeah. My God, the emotional response of people just crying their eyes out. And we're talking about like 60-year-old women who went and saw the original Star Trek when they were like a kid, a teenager or college or whatever, and they always loved Luke, and they're like crying on these YouTube videos that their like grandkids are recording and stuff. I mean, I'm tearing up watching these guys cry about a franchise that they loved, they saw killed off, they saw destroyed in front of their very eyes with the sequels, and now they see it revived again. They see what Jon Favreau has done. And hopefully there's enough people in Hollywood. I think that the guy who took over Disney, I forget his name.
Bob Chapek.
I think Chapek is savvy enough to figure this out. I mean, he's trying to play both sides of the fence so that he doesn't get into trouble right now. But I do think that he's recognized.
Really, he just came out against the Florida grooming bill.
Right, he did. He's choosing its side, definitely.
Yeah.
I do. If you watch Doomcock, there is this, his perspective, his thought is that I trust a lot of what Doomcock says because he's right about a lot of stuff. And his perspective seems to be that this guy has kind of been forced to take this
Yeah.
side. Yeah, I know. You're a big Doomcock guy.
Yeah.
But look, I mean, I don't know Chapek personally. I can't tell you, but I do feel like based on the rumors, based on what I've heard, that yeah, he does recognize that the get woke, go broke thing is real. And I do think that whether you're Disney or some other company, you can't ignore the success of Mandalorian. You can't ignore the success of a project that has essentially rejected the woke political angle, and there's just so few projects that do it. I mean, I think if you look at something like Stranger Things, they reject woke politics as well. I mean, they don't really reject it out of hand, but like they don't specifically say woke politics
I would just
are bad.
say
They just
like the
ignore
best
it.
thing for Disney to do would just be to be like politically like neutral, like don't take
That's
a
the
side
point I'm
in
trying
anything.
to make. Yeah.
Well,
It's not about.
The
It's not
other
about
thing,
injecting conservative politics. It's about not injecting leftist
yeah,
politics. If you
I
just
don't
write
think
good stories and ignore politics, you're going to probably be more successful.
I don't think it's about, because I wouldn't want some right winger coming in and taking over some big studio in Hollywood either. I think that would just lead to other bad things. I
don't think the political perspective of a right winger or a left winger matters as long as
Right,
they
and
recognize they shouldn't be injecting politics.
But see, here's the problem. We've entered a new system, and I've brought this up before. We've entered a new system of, like, at least especially in television. Okay, shows are no longer reliant upon viewership satisfaction in order to continue. They fall under the streaming services, so they'll go forever because there's so much content under that umbrella of the streaming services, Disney Plus, Amazon Prime, Netflix, all of these. So they're protected from what they're producing by, it's already paid for because it's all falling under a thing. Whereas you used to have to rely on ratings. The other issue is companies like Disney, they've bought everything. So they have a franchise and they know people will go and see a movie that they put out just because it falls under the Marvel umbrella or whatever.
Exactly.
And they don't really care whether it's good because they're like, well, people will go see it just to see how much they hate it. And that is still ticket sales.
Yep.
So we can put out anything that we want to, regardless of how unpopular it might be, and people will still buy it. What do I think there's a way to cross the Rubicon and create a new paradigm? Absolutely. Because it goes back to the democratization of technology. So we're now in a position where we can create content that is on par, but we have to get together and make I tell my students this all the time. I say, look, Hollywood is in trouble. They're making stuff that people don't want to see. I said, that means the door is opening. It's your time now. It's your turn to come in and start making content.
I was about to actually say the same thing on this stream. I was going to say, like, if you're watching this stream and you're the kind of person who wants to create content and you're not interested in pushing, a political agenda, you just want to tell good stories, it's relatively cheap to make movies now. It's relatively cheap to make short films. I'm trying to make a short film in Florida right now. The only reason I haven't done it is because I got a bad ear infection for like the last month, and I haven't been able to do anything. But it's weird how such a small infection can really just knock you out. It's really,
I know, right?
It's terrible. Yeah. It's terrible. But anyway, but yeah, if you just have like $10,000, if you can collect a little bit of money from friends and relatives, you can make a pretty good movie based with like LED lights and a couple of cheap lenses, on a relatively inexpensive digital camera.
Well, the one thing too that people have to keep in mind, okay, when I say the democratization of technology has allowed it to become easier to produce content, I don't mean that you could just grab your iPhone and go. There does need to be some, and there's two things that film school provides that you're not going to get anywhere else. One, it's the language of film. We all have to have a common language on set. If you're going to be communicating with your crew, you have to know how to communicate. And a film school is going to train you to be able to communicate with your crew in order to understand who's going to be the best DP, who's going to be the best AD. Your second AC is going to be important. How to operate a slate, how to move a C-stand, how to operate the lights, things like without popping a circuit. But
like a a good director kind of knows a little bit about everything.
Well, yes, exactly. But the other thing that a film school is going to give you is the networking of others that are just as passionate.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah,
that's invaluable. That's more important than all of the things you might learn technically about it.
Well, I would also say that like if, because I was faced with a decision to go to like NYC, New York University, or USC
NYU.
or UCLA, yeah.
Yeah.
And go into like $200,000-$300,000 worth of debt to go to those things, not including cost of living. And I chose to go to Penn State instead, which is a school I could afford, and I went to film school there. And so I didn't get the connections that most people who get to go to those schools
Same with me.
do.
University of Miami, no connections.
But going to like film festivals, I made those types of connections and stuff like that. Living in Hollywood, make those types of connections.
No, community college is more like that.
Real quick,
is going to talk about it.
Real quick, Sean. Buford T. Justice for $20. Thank you.
Buford T. Justice. That's
Favreau
fantastic.
destroyed that goodwill from Mandalorian Season 2 with Boba Fett by reaffirming that everything leads to the sequel trilogy and the destruction of Luke Skywalker. Favreau is a company man. He doesn't rock the boat.
I've heard this. I don't agree. I don't agree.
I mean, I don't know that much about the ins and outs of it, but I would suspect that some of that, there may be some truth in that. But I think that when it comes to being a company man, I mean, I think eventually we all are. I mean, he is working for the studio, and they can, get rid of him if well, think about it. If he said something that they're not going to like, what are they going to do?
Well, I mean, like, you could have said the same thing about Gina Carano before, like, she got fired, because she was like pretty entrenched, and they had plans for her character. In fact, they were basing an entire, new show around her character.
Yeah.
And for one tweet, she got canceled.
And you can, but it's an actress. I
mean, it's even easier to get rid of someone like Favreau, who's behind the scenes.
Well, sure, but the idea is that he is giving and that's why he wouldn't want to rock the boat. Maybe I don't think even Gina thought about, how much backlash there was going to be. I don't think she even considered it. Who would have?
Well, I think people in Lucasfilm had it out for her in particular.
It could be.
But
yeah.
Let me ask you guys. So, with this cultural vandalism concept, how much of it do you think is malicious versus just people who are, I guess, untalented and ignorant, thinking that they're doing the right thing? Like, is this an intentional thing of them trying to destroy franchises that we love, as opposed to them just being misguided?
I think it's malicious franchise owners that are hiring incompetent people. It's both.
That sounds about right.
Well, it's like I said before. I think that you have these you have people who want to expand the fan base, and then you have other people who want to destroy the fan base and not just ignore them, but piss them off and they turn their backs on them. They want, that's where the cultural vandalism exists, right? I wouldn't call it cultural vandalism if it's just incompetence, right?
Right.
I don't know if you guys remember this monkey Jesus from France. This old lady saw this picture of Jesus that was fading, that was being. This is hilarious, by the way. If Matthew, if you could look this up on your computer and show it.
Yeah,
it's
I know what you're talking about.
And it was this old fresco.
Painting restoration.
Yeah, it wasn't a particularly. It was called Ecce Homo, which I don't remember what that means. Or no, sorry, it was called something. I don't remember. Anyway. Sorry, I'm looking at an article about it, but there was this painting of Jesus' face, and it was crumbling off, like the paint was flaking off. It was just one of these frescoes that, over time it just goes away. It wasn't a particularly valuable one. And she thought, somebody needs to restore that. I'm a painter. I think I could probably do it. So she went in the middle of the night. I guess she says she spoke to the priest about it. She went in like the middle of the night and started to try to paint this Jesus fresco to try to restore it. And yeah, she messed it up. She messed it up. But the funny thing, okay, but this is not vandalism, right? This was a woman's genuine attempt. The funny thing is watching interviews with her, because she is totally loves the church. She totally loves, she's a devout Christian. She really wanted to make Jesus look better. She wanted to fix this painting. And I like every time I watch interviews with this woman, I cry. I laugh so hard I cry. It's so funny how genuine this woman is. She really wanted to improve this picture. And so, like, if you genuinely want to make something better and you just fail at it, I don't have a problem with you. Like, what the beautiful thing about this story is that this church was like going bankrupt. I mean, they just didn't have many followers anymore. There were very few people donating money to the church or giving in tithes. Because of this news story, after this news story broke, tons of people started coming to this church to see this monstrosity, right? and so this woman sort of inadvertently saved her church, and so, like, it's almost like a miracle, really. You know what I mean? So so you can have these sort of like unexpectedly beautiful results from inept people going out and just trying their best to do some good thing. And so good for that old lady.
Let me
That's my savior, you damn dirty ape.
let me ask you guys. Let me ask you guys this. So, like, Kathleen Kennedy, she's kind of like the devil for many Star Wars fans, because she is looked upon as the one who is solely responsible for driving Star Trek or Star Wars into the ground. So, like, I look at her and I don't think that she is malicious. I think that she genuinely cares for Star Wars and she wants it to be successful.
Really? You think so?
I do, but I feel like she tries
But
to...
what about those pictures of Luke on the wall with, like, the X through it and stuff like that? That you've heard the rumors.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a difference between, wanting to change the franchise versus, like, wanting to destroy it. I don't think she wants to destroy Star Wars, but I think that her ideas are so bad and so poorly thought out that they inadvertently are harmful to the franchise, and that she hired, when she came in, she hired a bunch of people based off of intersectionality, right? Like, she hired women, she hired people of color. They weren't necessarily fans of Star Wars, but they aligned with her politically. The whole Force is female thing, and stuff like that. And so, like, of course, those people are going to not like Luke Skywalker, the straight white male savior of the original trilogy. And like, I feel like she has a genuine love and respect for the franchise, but her hiring practices and her wanting to make, like, okay, let's bring more women in and make the main characters female, or like whatever. Like, it's those types of decisions that really irrevocably hurt the brand and the franchise. So I'm looking at her and I'm like, I feel like she's just incompetent.
I disagree.
Which is why Star Wars is in the state that it's in. So tell me why you disagree with that.
Well, I don't think you can produce the sequel to the original Star Trek series, Star Trek trilogy, and intentionally kill off Han and Luke, and actually love it. I don't think that's possible. I do not think that's possible. Because, I mean, it's just like I was talking about with the Favreau Mandalorian return of Luke Skywalker. People are crying who are, like, genuine fans of the original trilogy. And you hear people talking about the sequels and how absolutely devastated they were by just the disrespect in those films. And if Kathleen Kennedy was a true fan of Star Wars, or she had any kind of love for the franchise, she would have recognized that what they were doing was utterly disrespectful and was going to ruin Star Wars. I mean, you cannot really love Star Wars and think that those scripts were doing justice to
Not
that,
if
to
nobody
that franchise.
ever doesn't tell you no.
No. You recognize it on your own. You recognize it on your own.
Recognize it because she's never engaged with anybody that has disagreed with her or given her any type of different.
Yeah, but I don't think she's a true fan of those movies.
No, probably. Now, I would say that. I would agree with that. She's probably not a true fan. But the thing is that it wasn't the fact that she hired women. And it wasn't the fact that Rey was, the lead character and everything. There was no struggle, and there's no drama in it. And that was the thing that everybody, and what that did was that bolstered her anger towards the patriarchy or whatever it is, that they call it, because it wasn't received well. And she is coming at it from the perspective of they don't like it because it's women. That's not true at all. What it is because this woman never had to struggle. This woman didn't have to go through. It didn't make mistakes. It was And so, but she's also in such a high position, being put there, that who's going to tell her no?
Yeah, I mean, look, those characters, I don't like any of those characters. I don't like any of the sequel characters at all. But if you had said to me, these are the characters, and given me those parameters, and said, write sequels to the Star Wars movies using these characters, I would have written you some damn good stories. But they just, I don't know. I don't know what they were thinking. They wrote these unbelievably annoying characters. I think Finn was the only one that anybody really liked, and then they sort of sidelined him in the second movie.
I thought they were going to do something with him, and they set him up to be something big, and we were all waiting for it, and it never comes to fruition. And
to me, that's a sign of really bad writers. It's sort of like the writers that did the show Lost, right? Like as that show was on the air, I watched 2 episodes of it that this girl that I was dating made me watch, and immediately I knew that these writers were effing lost. I'm like, no, these guys do not know what they're doing. They're just writing. Because I could see that they would write a setup, and instead of then capitalizing on that setup, providing some kind of like conclusion to that story that they've set up, it was like a cliffhanger for the next episode. And then the next episode came along, and they just dismissed what they'd set up and then went to some other story. And I'm like,
what's the common denominator, Chris?
What do you mean?
What's the common denominator between Star Wars Episode 1 and Lost?
Yeah. Oh, you mean the sequels and Lost? Abrams. Abrams. Oh, yeah. I forgot that he did both those. Yeah, I mean, they loved the setup, and they had no concept of how to capitalize on the setups that they'd made. And I'm like, okay, this is a sign to me that these people do not know how to write. And the same thing with Star Wars that you're talking about. They set up this character of Finn, and then they just sort of like, I don't know what to do with him.
It was also the same JJ crew that did the Star Trek movies, the new ones.
Yeah,
that's true. That's true.
They ruined both franchises.
I tell students all the time, everybody's got a middle. A few people have a beginning, and almost nobody has an ending. Everybody's got a middle when they're writing a story. That's the easiest part to write, is the middle. Okay. How you're going to start it is even smaller. But these people here, they figure they've got a middle, so they'll start writing out the middle. They'll just throw a beginning on there, and we'll work out the ending in the third movie. Yeah. We'll work it out.
And you're talking about professionals.
Yes,
that's exactly the crazy thing.
That's the
problem. And let me tell you, I spent probably 10 years of my life, no joke, straight up, just working on endings. Because like I said, I learned to write from watching, and this is a little bit of advice for anybody who's a little bit self-conscious about the way that they end scripts and stories. I would say watch every single episode of The Twilight Zone, and watch every single episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents.
Yes.
And this will provide in your brain, this will provide a better understanding, I think, of how to conclude a story in a way that's very satisfying. Because it's not always a twist ending, but you have to do something that's satisfying to the audience based on what you set up.
I know.
This is a problem that J.J. Abrams has, is he's great at setting up these worlds and these concepts that are kind of fascinating, intriguing. You want to watch them, but he's got this stupid magic box. What does it call it? Mystery box idea, where it's like, it's better to never know what's in the box, and it's like, no, you open the box and it's something people don't expect, but is fantastic or really satisfying, and then they leave the theater thinking that was an amazing movie. If you leave them wondering what's in the box, they're going to leave going, I don't know what I just watched. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like,
you got blue balls.
Mystery box idea is just ruining. What's that?
You got blue balls.
You got blue balls. Yeah.
Narrative blue balls.
Imagine like if the Statue of Liberty had not been revealed at the end of Planet of the Apes, written by Serling.
Right. Yeah.
Imagine how dissatisfying the ending would have been had he just ridden off, and that would. I mean, really. So, and that's the payoff.
Or Soylent Green had just been food. It's food. It's food.
Marvelous food. Yeah.
Well, I know that when I write my stuff, I always start with the ending. I come up with the ending first.
Yeah, you have to be writing to something.
have
I
to
always say you always have to be writing to something.
Yes, exactly. There has to be a destination. But a lot of these writers today, they really don't have a destination in mind. They simply have a narrative that they want to push. I was in a pre-screening of Creed, and I watched
what?
it.
What is it?
Creed with,
Creed. Yeah.
So I go into a pre-screening of that. It hadn't been released to the general public yet, and they gave us our notes. And I said, "This is not." First of all, that was not Rocky Balboa I saw. Second of all, it defiled a character that I grew up admiring so much, Apollo Creed. He was one of my heroes growing up.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that he was great at what he did, he understood it, and there was a genuine love for the art of boxing in those films, and it was also like there became this bromance between these two. And there was never any like bad guy or good. It was, and then Creed comes out and they just make Apollo another philanderer, which I don't know, maybe he was on ice for a while or something like that. And then, because Michael B. Jordan's too young. But the other thing too was it was too obvious, and it was not, and I knew, and I put in my notes when I turned them in, I said, this was not originally a story around these characters. And it turns out it was a story that somebody had wanted to write, and they got lucky enough to attach it to the Rocky franchise, and it sold.
Right. Okay.
Same thing as Joker.
You're kind of going around the edges of this, but you're talking about this sort of like cliche of like the absentee black father. They end up putting Creed into that.
This was never him. Apollo Creed was not that.
No, he was a good man. Yeah, I mean, he was
a good man. He had honor. He had the honor of the warrior, and this was what things. Yeah, and that was what.
I totally agree with you. That movie was very different than other Rocky movies, and I don't really I don't have any kind of distaste for Michael B. Jordan. I don't have a problem with him. I don't have I watched that movie and I just came away thinking like, meh. I mean, it wasn't like, it was just like, and that's the problem. If you love a franchise like Star Trek or you love a franchise like Rocky and they come out with a meh movie or show that doesn't respect the original material, it's offensive to the big fans of that franchise.
You don't feel uplifted at the end of Creed.
It felt like a money grab.
Yes, it was. And it was somebody else's personal story that they wanted to sell. And the only way that they knew that they could sell it was by attaching it to another franchise. It was a very cynical thing to do. And they did the same. I mean, how do you...
It's a very mediocre story.
Yeah, exactly. And also, when was the last time you saw Rocky Balboa give up anything? He never quit a fight. But when he gets cancer, it's like, well, I guess I'm just going to die. Leave me alone and die.
Yeah, it was not. Yeah, it wasn't that good.
So that wasn't Rocky Balboa. That's not the person that we know. And this was but it was the person in the writer's life. And this is why it came off as false. Sure. So it didn't ring true, and that's a very cynical way to make movies.
Well, let me just say that like anytime they switch the race of a character and fans get outraged, they say, "Oh, well, that's because you're racist and you don't like black people."
Right. Exactly.
But the reality is, when you have a beautiful story and a beautiful character, the reason that story worked, the reason that character worked, was because all the elements worked together to make it that way. And it's something that people love. And people don't really like the things that they love being changed, generally. Like with James Bond.
I also take issue with this concept that you need to identify racially with the person on screen. Like seeing someone who looks like you on screen is important. Like,
because no black people ever liked Bruce Lee.
Or white or like a white guy could never respect Ripley from Aliens or something like that. If the character
who's the black vampire from Marvel?
Blade. Yeah,
Blade. Yeah, I love that movie.
Yeah, it was a great movie, and I mean, I loved Action Jackson.
I mean, this idea that Hollywood has, that you need to have some type of representation on screen in order to bring in people of that representation, is completely false. Like, you don't need to have black people in your movie to have black people enjoy your movie.
Right.
You don't need to have women in your movie to have
Can I present an example?
like
Sorry,
your movie. Yeah, go ahead.
When I was a kid, there was a show on television you may be aware of called The Cosby Show.
Yeah.
It's not talked about very often anymore.
No, it's not.
But it was a good show. It really was a good show. And I would say that, like, with any show, you try to relate to one of the characters. You find the characters that you find the most attractive, that kind of thing. And with The Cosby Show, I think it was Denise. Was Denise played by... was she the hot one? You know who I'm talking about? Like Lenny Kravitz's wife?
Lisa Bonet?
Lisa Bonet.
Yeah. Yeah, Lisa Bonet, I genuinely thought, like, that is a beautiful woman. Like, I was like, I had a crush on her when I was a kid,
Right.
And Theo, I related to Theo. Like, I mean, I didn't have, like, I didn't get bad grades in school like Theo did, but there were a lot of, like, Theo was always, like, trying to hunt for girls, he was always trying to, like, date some chick or something that he thought was, like, out of his league or whatever. I related to that stuff. I liked Theo, and at no point when I was a kid did I think, oh, I can't identify with this guy because he's a darker shade of brown than I am. So
exactly.
I can't. No. I totally related to Theo. I never had I never even thought twice about it. I never thought twice about the fact that Denise was black, and so I couldn't find her attractive. You know what I mean? Like this idea that to your point, Matthew, you do not need to be the same race as somebody or even the same gender to relate to them.
Well, there also seems to be this push to make female characters act like men. Have you guys noticed this? They basically write strong female characters, quote unquote, as dudes with breasts, and this is especially true in the comic book industry right now. Yeah. Where basically women are being erased to the point where, like, femininity is no longer an aspect of being a female character. And it's kind of insulting because no one likes that. Women don't like that, men don't like that, so why are they doing it?
Well, it's because they're trying too hard to get rid of the male gaze stereotype, and they really don't want to be accused of some type of gender bias or some putting forward unhealthy thoughts or whatever. But whenever I see a 90-pound woman take out a guy that's 6'2" and weighs 220, simply because, well, it's like Raffi, right? She disarms this guy in the park. He pulls a gun on her, right? He's already got her drawn down. She's got the gun in her face. Yeah. And then she just disarms him like that. And then she's able to field strip the Glock. It's like,
did you see Birds of Prey?
No.
Have you seen the breakdown? I think Critical Drinker does it. I'm not sure who does it, but there's a breakdown because they play in slow motion the Birds of Prey fight sequences. It's hilarious. Like the way that they, somebody like goes to punch them, and they get out of the way, and then they hit them, but they kind of hit them like that. Like there's no force to the punch. It's just like,
right. Yeah. There's no.
And then the stunt guy like flips over like he's just been
they
brutally
do the same
assaulted.
Thing with Ray Skywalker. They broke down the fight scenes in like
that's
when
hilarious.
Ray is going, and
she was definitely better than Birds of Prey though. But the Birds of Prey stuff was like unbelievably poorly done. And I've seen this recently in a lot of projects. There was the 366 or 345 or 321 or whatever the hell it's called. The
first
the Jessica Chastain female spy movie.
Yeah, I watched that. I guess because I was in the mood to be disgusted, and it's the same exact thing. All of the fight scenes, these women are not punching correctly. They're not.
But you know what? At least with that movie, like they made something new. They're like, we're gonna do Fox Force 5. But like serious,
I respect the goal. I respect the intention. I don't respect the execution. It was so poorly done, and like getting women to fight in that way. What makes sense to me is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. If you're going to do it, the 355. Thank you.
Yes.
To Buffy the Vampire Slayer makes sense. She is sort of like this mythical chick. She's, got these superpowers, and so she can fight. Okay, that makes sense. All right, it's in the story. That was well written. It worked. Okay, what they do now is they just take ordinary chicks and say, oh yeah, it totally makes sense that you could knock out this giant guy. And it just goes beyond suspension of disbelief, I think.
One of the funniest things to me, Chris, is like, so when Last Jedi came out, and I was highly critical about Rey, I wrote a lot of articles kind of deconstructing why.
How can you be critical of the bestest ever?
I know, right? I wrote a lot of articles critical about, how Rey was written, and everyone was like, "Oh, you're sexist for thinking this," and I was like, the character was created and written by straight white men. Okay, so how can this fictional creation of a straight white man, how can I be sexist for criticizing that? Because it's not like I'm criticizing the actual actress who played her. I'm criticizing the character that was created by a dude.
I had a discussion with a younger guy the other day. He was like in his late 20s, and he was talking about how his generation doesn't really value sex like they used to in the olden days, right? As if this was like new to his generation. I'm like, have you ever heard of something called the 60s? But anyway, what I was trying to explain to him, like, women lie a lot about how impacted they are by physical sex, right? What I learned when I was growing up is that women are very emotionally attached to that act. To acting out sexually. Men are not so much. Like if you're a dude and you get with some like hot chick at a party and you sleep with her, you leave the next morning. If you're not like super into this chick, you may never think about that night again, or very seldom. It doesn't probably affect you on an emotional level. The woman may go home the next morning and be totally have fallen in love with that guy, or she may be absolutely disgusted with herself. Like, what the hell did I do?
Walk of shame.
Exactly. In my experience, the women who insist the most that they are unaffected by this stuff tend to be the ones that are... Do you have something to say, Darlie? the women who insist the most that they are unaffected by this tend to be the ones that are the most affected by it. Now, this is not always true, of course, but in general, this is often true. And so if you have, so you have this cultural idea that women should be able to just have sex with any guy that they want, it shouldn't affect them at all, and it shouldn't matter. You're kind of just dismissing the actual natural feelings of a lot of women. And there's this idea that it's a feminist idea that women should be able to behave like men and sex shouldn't affect them. And it's like, sure, that would be wonderful for them. Unfortunately, that doesn't tend to be true. And so if you're not recognizing that reality, you're not protecting the women who would naturally be affected by this. And in fact, I would say that to have a cultural standard that says maybe don't just have sex with whomever you want is, in a way, more feminist than the idea of, oh, you know what, just have sex with whomever you want. There is this weird idea now where we have confused like the idea of sexual liberation with the idea of, like feminism and protecting women's rights. And it's like, those are to me, those are two different, like being pro-women and being pro-sluttiness is not necessarily the same thing. And so I'm trying to explain this to this guy, and he admits it, and he finally says, you know what, actually, I've actually experienced that too, where I thought this woman, it wouldn't affect her, and then it did, and I felt bad about it. And he's like, but I'm never going to do anything culturally to combat this idea because I benefit from it. And, this guy was like a kind of a leftist guy. And I'm like, yeah, see, that's what we call being a selfish bastard. Like, you call yourself a feminist, but in reality, you're just a selfish piece of garbage who will take advantage of women because there's this cultural standard now that they should be able to have sex with whomever they want. And it shouldn't bother them. You're like borderline raping women essentially at that point. I feel like.
Well, the terms have changed too. I mean, the women's empowerment movement was manifested by miniskirts in the '60s, and now you have women, like women supposedly in the Twitter mob complaining at how sexist and objectifying those were. No, these were symbols of empowerment to be able to wear a little miniskirt.
Well,
This is what they did
well,
on Star Trek.
you could argue that modern feminism is more about anti-men as opposed to pro-women.
That's exactly what it is.
But
Yeah.
real quick, guys. So we've been going for about 2 hours now. I want to give each one of you a final thoughts, last word about the idea of cultural vandalism and how Hollywood is ruining our franchises, and let people know where they can find you on social media. So, Professor Sean Collette, why don't we start with you? What are your final thoughts on this concept of cultural vandalism? How do you think it can be fixed, and where can people find out more about you?
Well, the first thing about fixing it is people have to stop legitimizing the traditional means of entertainment. Stop giving legitimacy by going to see something in the theater simply because it's got a franchise name attached to it. Those are dead. Don't expect it to come back. It's our time now to start taking the younger generation and cultivating their imagination, make them think, spark their imagination, get them out there and making new content, because now is the time when you can compete with the studio system. And just get over your addiction of, your Marvel addictions and things like that, and stop seeing things just so you can, see how bad it is. I mean, that's not a reason to go watch entertainment. But I think that's the best way to fix it, is to just start making content out there, but start absorbing content from other sources rather than the vacuum chamber that we all live in. Start watching things that were from generations past, and I think that's the way to fix it. I think it is being fixed to a degree. People are starting to kick back and things like that, and I think there's more and more people out there that are starting to recognize that I think I can do something better, and I think I can do something better from the standpoint of a genuine affection for whatever it is I'm writing, rather than an agenda. But where to find me? College of Southern Nevada. I don't do a lot of social media. I don't really care. So I just, I'm teaching rock video production and visual effects during the summers. So if you're in Vegas and you want to take a film course, we've got a couple film courses during the summer, but in the fall, we welcome everyone and try to get as many people on board, and we'll show you how to make a film. You'll end up with at least one short film at the end of your first semester. At least one. We won't just talk about it. We'll
Awesome.
Force you.
All right. Thanks, Sean. And Chris, first of all, I want to encourage everyone watching this to go check out Chris's video that he did on Star Trek Discovery and J.J. Abrams' sister, Stacy. It was an excellent video, very well researched, as are all of Chris's videos. But particularly that one, which inspired the whole topic of the stream. Chris, your final thoughts on cultural vandalism, how to fix it, and where can people find out more about you?
Well, thanks, man. Yeah, that video is on my Mr. Reagan YouTube channel. And but I would actually encourage everybody to join my Mr. Pagan YouTube channel, which is Mr. Reagan's evil twin brother. That's my sort of political comedy channel, and I'm going to be posting a couple of videos on there shortly. So if you subscribe to that, you're going to get those videos, and they are, I think, hilarious. That's just my personal view. But anyway, look, in summary, I would say, look, if you're serious about writing, because this channel is about bad writing, right? And if you want to avoid being a bad writer, if you're a writer and you're serious about writing well, we've discussed that the biggest problem right now in Hollywood, well, one of the bigger problems, not the biggest, but one of the bigger problems is the inability to write good endings. And it's a little bit off topic from the subject of this video, but I would like to say, if you want to avoid the trap of the J.J. Abrams style of setup and lead to nowhere, I would say watch every episode of The Twilight Zone. Watch every episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Read the old stories of O. Henry. I mean, he was writing in like the 1900s, like he was way back. The stories of O. Henry, amazing stories. These kinds of conclusions are, reading as much of that as you can and watching as much of that stuff as you can will give you a good sense of how to write a satisfying conclusion. And again, it's not always about a twist ending, but it's about writing satisfying endings. I think that's something that I studied for a very, very long time. It's a subject that I would say that I I don't know if I'd say I'm an expert at it, but it's just something that's sort of my forte. It's my discipline, writing good endings, and something I think that too few people have figured out. So if you can do that consistently, and you can do that really, really well, you will have an ability that that very, very few people have, very, very few writers have. And a lot of professional writers I've talked to have basically said to me, well, that's just something that nobody really does well. And so they just kind of dismiss it like that. And I'm like, dude, you can consistently write good endings. You just have to really work on it and study it. So I would say Twilight Zone, Alfred Hitchcock Presents O. Henry. If you just saturate yourself with those stories, you will learn how to write endings really, really well consistently. Again, check out my Mr. Reagan channel if you're into politics, or Mr. Pagan if you're into comedy on YouTube.
All right, and I would just point out that when people tell you that's something that nobody does well, what they're really saying is that's something I don't do well,
and they don't care to improve.
And they don't care to improve. That's right. So you know, part of being a storyteller is knowing how to end your stories properly.
I'm curious if Sean Collette agrees with me about those resources to improve.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's I mean, I would throw in there, you know, a couple of things. One of the things that, you know, he may catch a lot of, you know, catch a lot of grief, but Tarantino knows how to end a story, because
he's a good writer. Yeah,
it's in the Tarantino verse. He knows how to end his stories, so that would be another good resource. I mean, you know, I don't like everything he's, you know, done, because they're just not to my taste. But
I wasn't happy with the ending to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Oh, I loved it. Oh, it came from out of nowhere. I was waiting.
You and I will have to get into a fist fight later.
So, I was waiting for Sharon Tate to get slaughtered, and it didn't happen.
So I'm gonna. I was so
disappointed.
I'm gonna have to do a bad writing stream just about writing endings.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Everybody's got a middle. A few more people might have a beginning, but this many people have an ending.
All right. Well, I want to thank you both for being on my distinguished panel this evening. Mr. Reagan, it's a pleasure as always. Professor Sean Collette, thank you for joining us. And to everyone out there, just a reminder that we're going to be live on this channel Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, talking about Star Trek with another distinguished panel. My cohort in crime, Matt Vader 74, Brian from the Popcast guys, and Salty Trekker himself, along with Danny the Dork Knight. We all get together every Saturday morning and talk about the latest episodes of Star Trek and how bad they are and how much we hate life. So if you are enjoyed by watching a bunch of white men complain about science fiction, come join us on Saturday mornings. And also, our fearless leader, Alex, the salty nerd himself, has a live stream Monday nights at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern for you night owls out there. And he always loves it when you guys come out and hang out with him and chat. So be sure to check him out as well every Monday evening. We also do live watch parties on our Discord for our members area shows. So like this month, we're doing Stargate Atlantis. We're doing live watch parties on our Discord. So like you don't even have to be a member. You can just hop onto our Discord and, you know, join us for the watch parties and watch Stargate Atlantis along with us. And it's a lot of fun. But until next Thursday, I wish you all adieu. And I hope you enjoyed this episode of Bad Writing. So with this, I will just say, stay salty, my friends.